Welcome to Cell Life Church's series entitled Relationships. Regardless of what we do and where we do it, people are involved. People mean relationships. We're exploring the various relationships that we as humans face throughout our lifetimes. Throughout this series, we've been looking at the sibling relationship, the marriage relationship, parenting relationship, and if you've missed any of those, I'd like to encourage you to take a moment and go back to our website, see us on Facebook, and look those up. It's really had some great discussions. Today, we're discussing the authority relationship, and all of us have someone in authority over us. Whether that's employers, government officials, the church leaders, community officials, and some of us are even in authority over other people, such as parents or other leadership role. The relationship of how we respond to those in authority over us is just as important as how we act to those who have authority over us. And so we're going to take a moment, and I'm going to ask that you just pause the video and discuss the following question. What does a healthy versus unhealthy relationship look like? As you discussed in your groups, you may have come up with a common denominator being how a person with that power actually uses that power in authority, whether they lord it over or whether they use their authority to lead with graciousness. You know, we can define authority in so many different ways, and every relationship needs communication, respect, and selflessness in order to be healthy. We're going to look at an example of an unhealthy authority relationship in the Bible between the religious leaders of Jesus' time and the Jews, and primarily the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, they were a sect of Jews that were considered the master interpreters of the oral law of the rabbis. And so back in Jesus' time, you know, they didn't have the Bible. They had the law, our Old Testament, and a lot of times it was passed down orally, much as even ancient literature was passed down orally. And so the Pharisees, they studied that, and they were known as the authority in that. They were respected by the Jews so much that when the Jews faced an important decision, the opinions of the Pharisees even outweighed the opinions of the high priest and the king of the land. That's how much authority these Pharisees had. But what that caused is that the Pharisees then relied on their popularity with the peasant masses, that when Jesus walked the earth, it causes jealousy to happen, because Jesus was a commoner and came from, he was poor, you know, and he came from this peasant mass, and Jesus began to gain this popularity. Well, they became jealous. The Pharisees became jealous, and they didn't want to lose their influence over the people. And so the Pharisees, they told the Jews that what they could not do. So this was that group of people that said, you can eat this, but you can't eat that. You can do this 6 days out of the week, but you can't do that on the seventh. And all these, they took the law that Moses laid out, and they added a lot to it and made it so much more difficult and hard to deal with. We're going to read an example of this relationship out of John 9, which is going to describe the Pharisees' response to Jesus' healing of a blind man. John 9:13 through 23 says, "They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner perform such signs? So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. What have you had to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a prophet. They still did not believe what that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age. Asked him." Well, we learn in this passage that there's a fear between the religious leaders and the Jews. You know, this is they weren't necessarily a ruling class, but they definitely had enough power that they could say, "You know what? If you say Jesus is the Christ, or you agree with who Jesus says he is, you're no longer part of the synagogue." And the synagogue was the central part of the Jewish culture. I mean, you went to synagogue, you know, like you go to school. You know, it was just ingrained and part of the culture that people participate in. Well, the blind man's parents, they were so afraid that if they admitted Jesus healed their son, that they would be thrown out of the whole Sanhedrin. And so the Pharisees, they ruled with fear and humiliation. You know, there's other examples in the Gospels where we see the religious leaders abusing their authority. In one case, they take a woman caught in adultery and they stand her in front of a crowd to question Jesus about her sin. So instead of approaching her quietly, you know, pulling her aside and saying, "You know what you're doing isn't right. We need to do something about this." No. Jesus is out teaching in the city, and instead, it's interesting because the Bible says they caught her in her sin.
Where was the guy in all of this?
Exactly.
That's my question.
That's right. You know, and so they bring her out and they humiliate her to make a public spectacle of her, and that's just how they ruled. And another time we see the religious leaders confronting and condemning the disciples for picking wheat as they walked along the road on the Sabbath because they were hungry.
Yeah.
You know?
Figure that one out.
I know. That's like walking down the road and somebody has an apple tree and you grab an apple because you're hungry, you know, and that's work because you picked it. And so that's just how the Pharisees and the religious leaders were in that day. They abused their authority by lording it over the people. They were so concerned about keeping their status as respectable and the authority of the law that they would humiliate and condemn those who did not do what they said. We see in this example of the religious leaders and the Jews that communication was only one-sided.
Yeah.
You know, it was
just, I'm going to talk at you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, talking at you. And, you know, we can take that as such a sign of disrespect. We've all been in situations where somebody is being so critical of you, but not in a way that is constructive and teaching. Instead, they're talking at you. This is what you're doing wrong, and you need to be doing this, and you know. And so that's exactly what these Pharisees were doing. And we see that as far as respect, it was absent. You know, as far as the Pharisees had no respect for the Jews. Yeah. It was my way or no way. However, there is no example of selflessness either, shown on really either side of the relationship. Yeah. We don't see that. You know, so this is an example of an unhealthy relationship, and Jessica is going to share with us totally opposite, a great example of a healthy relationship in authority.
Yeah, and I'm super excited. I get to talk about Jesus's relationship with his disciples, and really throughout the Gospels when he first calls them to when he sends them to heaven. It's just a great example, and it's so much fun to read like about the dynamics between him and his disciples. I just picked one story specifically to share, and it's found in John chapter 13, and it's near the end of Jesus' life before he's crucified, and he's with his disciples. And starting in John chapter 13, verse 1, it was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that was wrapped around him. Pausing right there is just a good example of Jesus' selflessness.
Yeah.
He shows a great amount of humbleness, which the Pharisees never did.
Right.
They were very proud and just the complete opposite, whereas Jesus was willing to do the work of a servant and wash his disciples' feet. I mean, his followers' feet.
Right.
That's like great, a great degree of humbleness. And
absolutely.
Going back to that question, you hear people ask, is it better to be feared or loved? The Pharisees were feared. It was like, oh, they're going to cast me out of the synagogue. But everything Jesus built on love.
Right.
And it's mirrored in his actions.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just, it's amazing.
When you see the response of the Jews was completely different.
Yeah.
You know, when it came to the Pharisees versus to Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. And like, oh, the Pharisees can cast me out of the synagogue, but Jesus, oh, he can save me from condemnation and damnation. And he was all about grace and love.
Right.
And I think that's wonderful and beautiful. But reading further on in the story, verse 6, Jesus, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then, Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not every one was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Jesus told his disciples what he expected of them.
Right.
And that's great communication. I mean, this is what I've done. Now you do it.
Right.
And you can see it in his teachings. I mean, he was very clear. And the communication worked both ways, because you can see the disciples throughout the Gospels asking Jesus questions and him answering them.
Right. And they weren't afraid to ask him questions.
Yeah, exactly. He was approachable.
Right.
And he was willing, he wanted people to come to him. I mean, that story, let the little children come to me. I mean, he was approachable and was very accepting of people.
Right.
And was willing to hear everyone. The Samaritan woman. Accept everyone, no matter who they were, where they were from. And Jesus respected his disciples.
Yeah.
I mean, he led by example. He didn't expect his disciples to do something he himself wasn't going to do. Right. I mean, he said, I wash your feet, you go wash other people's feet. He died for us, and he gave his life for love. And he expected the same from everyone else. Right. And Jesus, in his position of authority, displayed an act of service. And I think that's a good example of good leadership as well. As a person in leadership, that really is a position of service, because you are serving the people who are under you, who you are leading. They are your responsibility.
Right.
They're not there to serve you. You are there to serve them.
Right.
And I think Jesus displayed that in this like perfect act of humbleness and service. And so just like after discussing all of that, why don't you guys pause the video and discuss in your own groups, how do selflessness, respect, and communication apply to your authority relationships? Hi, welcome back. I hope you had some good discussion. I'm going to be sharing a past experience that I've had with authority. And I had this job and I had this manager. And I don't think she wasn't a very good manager. And so this kind of probably an unhealthy authority relationship.
Yeah.
Because like when she was working, the whole work environment, you could feel it. Just the communication. I guess you go back to the Pharisees. She would talk at you. Like you have, because sometimes managers, you're in that position, and I understand that sometimes you have to correct behavior, or you have to give that feedback to your employees. I don't think she did a good job of it. I'm trying to think of the good word, but she would talk at you. This is what you're doing wrong. And just like it left you feeling more down than anything else. It's like, I don't feel good right now.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh man. And that level of respect, I don't think she respected her employees. And that showed in the communication, is that she just talk at you, whereas she didn't show that level of care about your growth in the company. And sometimes that was kind of hard to deal with. And sometimes you have to realize that you can't control the actions of the other person.
Right.
So that was kind of where my relationship with God came in. Is like, okay, God, I have to work with her today. Help me. And it comes back like, I can help me to respect her position. Even if I really can't respect her, help me to respect that position that she holds. Jesus says it when the Pharisees ask, well, should we pay taxes? And he's like, whose image is on the coin? Caesar's. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So in that position, that authority position, even if they're not a good authority figure, is still having respect for that position that they have, because they are in that position over you. She was in that position over me. So even if I had a hard time and I didn't like working with her, I had to put up with it, and I had to respect that position that she herself had. It wasn't always easy.
Well, and we're only responsible for our actions.
Exactly. I couldn't control how she acted or reacted. I could only control how I acted or reacted to what she did. So did I react poorly? I'm like, well, she doesn't respect me. I'm not going to respect her. Or am I going to handle this maturely and how God wants me to handle it, with love and respect, and try to have that level of communication with her? It's like, even if she's not approachable, am I approachable? Can I approach her? Not so much based on her, but based on what I can do to make the situation better. So knowing all of that, I really depended on God for that. It's just like, oh, dear God, help me. I'd like pray before I go to work. Dear God, help me. Because me, the way I wanted to respond is like, sometimes when she'd say something, I would want to snap right back, but that wouldn't help the situation at all. So it's like, God, help me to communicate. I mean, that's really, I relied on God for help. And I don't know if she was a Christian or not, if God was involved in her life or not, but God was involved in my life. So it was like, how do I shine him through in that relationship? And just taking all of that, sometimes as a person under authority, you have to remember you're not responsible for the other person. You're just responsible for yourself and how God shines through that relationship. And Kelly's actually going to show the other point of view as a person in authority with people.
Yeah, God has given us many examples of how to treat those we are in authority over. And He has given us instructions as parents, as spouses, as employers. The best example, of course, is God Himself.
Yeah.
As He's an authority over all, not just mankind, but the animals, the mountains, the oceans, the valleys, the weather, everything. God is in authority over. Psalms 86:15 reads, "But you, Lord, are compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." What an incredible example of God's authority. Psalm 105 says, "For God is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." So He's not just good to me, but He's good to my kids and my kids' kids and the people who live before me. He's just a gracious, loving God. Jeremiah 32, verses 38 through 41 says, "They will be my people, and I will be their God. I will give them singleness of heart and action, so that they will always fear me, and that all will go well for them and for their children after them. I will make an everlasting covenant with them. I will never stop doing good to them, and I will inspire them to fear me, so that they will never turn away from me. I will rejoice in doing them good, and will assuredly plant them in this land with all my heart and soul." God is passionate about us. And what an incredible picture of a gracious, loving God who says He will inspire us. He will do good. I used to work for a Christian evangelistic organization whose purpose was to reach teenagers for Christ. As a newly hired individual, I was given a task of organizing a citywide youth outreach. My boss, he had confidence in me, knowing that I had some background in doing this in the past. And so I went about putting this outreach together, and I reserved an old theater in the downtown area. I worked with area youth leaders. I invited teens to attend. I had gathered some co-workers and laborers and kind of assigned them tasks to make this happen. I had planned various games, video clips, comedy routines, and then I ended the evening, plan on ending the evening with a gospel presentation. Well, as the night wore on, to my surprise, the theater was mostly empty. Hardly anybody came. And the games, the video clips, the comedy routines were less than par. And it wasn't something that I had viewed or gone through or reviewed before I did this. I just basically said, okay, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of that, let's make it happen. And the MC I recruited, I had two MCs, and they were batting the boys and the girls against each other and created this environment that was very competitive and very negative. Well, after all of this had gone on, well, then the minister, it's his turn to come up and present the gospel. Well, the atmosphere just was not a friendly atmosphere at that point. It did not promote a good atmosphere to listen to the love of Jesus. And I was mortified by this event's presentation, the message. To this day, I consider that as a failure in my life. When I look back, that was an absolute failure. My boss, though, was completely gracious to me. We discussed what went well, which was a very short list, and things that could be improved upon, which was a very long list. And then shortly after that, he gave me another task. And he said, Kelly, I want you to be the leader of this regional-wide evangelistic outreach. And from that past failure, I took what I learned, and I learned to communicate better with my team. I learned to respect everyone's strengths and weaknesses, and I realized that those under me might fail, but that's okay. It's okay. And to come alongside of them and to help them, and just because my boss showed that to me. And so I, in turn, as when I was in authority over this group of people, which this particular event, I had a volunteer base of over 100 people. I had team leaders in various activities that I managed, and I was able to learn from my event of how to manage them in a way that showed graciousness and selflessness, and communicate with them. And the second event I did ended up being an annual event that reached thousands of teenagers, and I had the privilege of overseeing that event for 7 years. And to this day, I'm grateful for the growth that I saw from that failure of an event to how the Lord was able to use that and change me as a leader and somebody in authority to this other event that ended up being so much more successful, where thousands of people were saved, began that journey with Jesus. And it's a lot of it had to do with being in authority and using what the Lord had taught me, and allowing the Lord to use me to manage the people under me. And so I was blessed for that opportunity. We're going to leave you or go to this next question, the last question in this discussion series. And if you would take a moment and pause the video and discuss God's role in your authority relationships and how it can be improved.
Hi, welcome back. I hope you had some good discussion, and that this encouraged you in your authority relationships, and God's role in that relationship. Just a thank you from Cell Life Church for joining us today, and we pray that this whole discussion has caused you to evaluate your authority relationships and see how God can take a bigger role in that if he isn't already. Right. As always, we would love to hear from you. Our website, our YouTube channel, or even on Facebook. And we invite you to join us next time as our team discusses our relationship with Jesus.
That'll be good.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.